Canada is on course for the worst decline in the standard of living in over 40 years. And you've just got to realize that this is, in fact, a depression. They're just using other words in order to cover up the literal depression that is going on in this country, which we're going to get into now. So Canada's standard of living on track for worst decline in 40 years. Slump in GDP per person threatens to be longest and largest since 1985, study says. So this came out via the Financial Post. They weren't the only ones reporting on this. Also, the Daily Hive were reporting on this. And you can look at the chart and see that really GDP per capita has not really done a fat lot over the past 10 years. And if you go to a place like the United States, for example, you can see that it's pretty much, it went down after the financial crisis and then has just gone straight up. And there was a little blip during the cerveza sickness, but it's just continued going straight up. Whereas you look at Canada, it went down during the financial crisis, came up, and then has just practically done nothing with the blip or the cerveza sickness there. So obviously what's going on? Not very good news that is coming out for Canada, but what we've been saying time and time again on this channel is that we're in this depression. The mainstream media are obviously never going to call it that or admit that. So measuring a country's growth can be contentious. Measure Canada's gross domestic product by aggregate and it doesn't look so bad. Really? I mean, it looks pretty much flat. I mean, it doesn't look great, guys, when you look at just normal, regular GDP. You have to realize they deflate those numbers with a fake inflation number, the CPI. So anyway, measure Canada's gross domestic product by aggregate and it doesn't look so bad, but measure it by per person or per capita and it's dismal. When a country has had a population surge, as Canada has, economists say measuring by per person gives a better picture of its standard of living. And according to a new study by the Fraser Institute, that standard is headed for the biggest decline in 40 years. Ouch. The study by Grady Munro, Jason Clements, and Milagros Palacios, I'm not even going to try and pronounce that second name, looks at the three worst periods of decline and recovery of real GDP per person in the country since 1985. They are between 1989 and 1994, years that included a recession between 2008 and 2011, the aftermath of the great financial crisis, and this last that began in 2019. And obviously, if we go back to that chart, they're talking about here because really there's been no recovery in the past 5 years. You've just seen GDP per person that has essentially done nothing. And this chart, I mean, it only goes back to 1982, but if you look at 1989, you can see that it took a while to recover there. You're talking about 1996, so 6-7 years for that recovery. So we're coming up on that, and that's what they're saying. The lack of meaningful recovery suggests that mid-2019, Canada has experienced one of the longest and deepest declines in real GDP per person since 1985, said the study's authors. Between April of 2019 and the end of 2023, when the last data was available, inflation adjusted per person GDP fell 3% from 59,000 to 58,111. That is surpassed only by the declines in 1989 to 1992, when GDP per person fell 5.3%, and the financial crisis when it fell 5.2%, says the study. The latest decline has lasted 18 quarters, making it the second longest in the past 40 years. Only the decline of 1989 to 1994, which lasted 21 quarters, was longer. So really, when you think about what's happening, guys, you have to remember that Canadians can't afford to eat. They can't afford shelter. There are so many problems that we have in society today. A lot has been caused by the housing crisis, housing bubble that we've had. You've also had immigration that has been ramped up massively over the past 5 years for no apparent reason, because it's not like Canada had the growth to support it, and it's not like they were bringing in highly skilled workers like they said they were. Like they were saying, oh, we've got all these labor shortages, we need to bring in all these immigrants, but then they're bringing in more people to work at Walmart and Tim Hortons and Wendy's, which is not really solving the problem that they're saying they're actually trying to solve. It's incredibly interesting when you think about it, incredibly sad as well, as Canada is essentially in a depression right now, and it's caused by the economic implications implications of all the debt, all the immigration, the lack of productive growth in the economy. It's a huge decline that we're seeing, widely admired for how it weathered the global financial crisis of 2008. And they're talking about Canada. But what I want to tell you is, obviously, as somebody who has researched this time and time again and really studied it to see what happened in 2008, how Canada did kind of avoid the financial crisis. And really, it was because it didn't have the massive housing bubbles like in the United States. Sure, housing prices had risen at that point, but the debt levels within households were just not at the insane levels that they were in the United States. People hadn't took out their home equity, gone and bought other investment properties, and just overextended themselves. I'm not just talking about mortgages. I'm talking about borrowing even more money, credit cards, lines of credit, all that sort of stuff to then go and buy and finance more real estate to finance more real estate. However, as you've probably noticed, that's exactly the situation that we're in right now, where people have gone to that extreme. And in the United States, they actually haven't. So in the United States, they're nowhere near as leveraged, the household, as they were back in 2008. But in Canada, they are even more leveraged than the US households were back in 2008. So it's kind of crazy when you actually think of the dynamics that are going on here. They didn't really avoid the financial crisis in a way. They just kind of deferred it because Canada used that stepping stone to increase debt levels to an absolutely insane level, and also fool people and lull people, including economists, bankers, etc., into a false sense of security that Canada was somehow better, and that's the reason why it didn't have a financial crisis, when it's really just simply the debt levels. So that's what's happening there. And now I want to take you over to another article here, which also came out, which kind of goes with the theme that we're seeing there, which is poverty report cards, which provinces got the worst grades. So basically, this new report came out from the Food Banks Canada, and it basically just shows how it's just getting worse when it comes to Canadians not being able to afford to feed themselves. So poverty and food insecurity have worsened in most of Canada in the past year, and most provincial governments aren't doing enough to address the problem, according to a released series of report cards. And again, they're kind of going towards the government and saying, we need the government to do something here. It just drives me insane that every time people look towards the government to solve their problems, when the government is the one that constantly creates problems, and they're the ones that have caused a lot of these problems. And then they go to the arsonists and say, hello, can you help me put out this fire? I mean, it's just unbelievable. But anyway, Food Banks Canada, which works with more than 5,100 food banks and community groups in all provinces and territories to relieve and prevent hunger, released its second annual report on Wednesday. Nearly half of those surveyed, 44%, feel they are doing worse financially compared to last year, according to the report card. That is no surprise considering the high and insane debt levels and also the high, crazy amount of inflation that we've seen over the past 4 or 5 years. And the wage growth just has not backed that up. And most people have subsidized what they lost in income with debt. So they're looking at an even worse predicament because essentially those debt costs have also now skyrocketed as well. So it's just a ticking time bomb, really. And then they say it's devastating, just a depth of need right across the country that unfortunately is not being met with a sense of urgency to deal with what we think is an urgent issue and a massive scale of an issue right across the country. And it's just crazy to me when you think about what's going on, and just so many people cannot afford to feed themselves in Canada. I mean, this is no joke. This is reality here in 2024. I mean, this is going to go in the history books, or maybe it's not going to make it into the history books. I don't know. But really, this is the reality of what a depression does. It means people can't afford basic things like food. If you go back to the Great Depression, that's what happens. You also see crime that skyrockets because guess what? More people are living on the edge. So that means, unfortunately, more people resorting to crime. And that's exactly what we're seeing in most Canadian cities as well. And then you look across what's going on. So British Columbia, same rating. Alberta has gone down in ratings. No surprise there. Northwest Territories, not enough data. Yukon, same thing. Nunavut, same thing. Saskatchewan is down. Manitoba is down. Significant drop, it says. Ontario is the same. Quebec is C+, which is down. Newfoundland and Labrador is the same as 2023. New Brunswick, same as 2023. And then Nova Scotia is the only one that is higher, along with PEI, which is higher as well. So there's only 2 provinces there which are actually higher on this report. And again, I just want to highlight, we're here in 2024. We're talking about Canadians. We're talking about so-called a quote-unquote first world country where people cannot afford to feed themselves. Now, I'm not looking at the government here saying, hey, government, why don't you step in and do something, because that'll just create more problems. Instead, I'm looking at, why has this happened? How have we got to this point? How can we move forward? And the only reality is you need to get the economy back on track. And that's going to be a long-winded process, unfortunately. And you've got to really shut down all this unneeded, unnecessary immigration that we have right now, which is just adding to the problem as we see more students going to food banks than ever before. Also, a lot more people now exploiting food banks as well, which is the sad reality, because you're going to get that with just the amount of people that have increased going to the food banks. Some people take advantage of the fact that there is no income qualification checks or anything like that. And personally, I believe there should be. But this is the reality in Canada in 2024, guys. It's no joke. So anyway, what do you think? Do you think this is a depression, recession, or do you think everything is fine, rainbows and sunshine? Anyway, if you've enjoyed this video, I would highly recommend that you check out this video here. And if you're looking for a VPN to get around all the censorship, then you know where to go. Go to expressvpn.com/marketmania, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.